Welcome back, everyone, to Pontos Fathom Press. This is the Pontos Fathom Podcast, episode 43, and today we're going to talk about the esoteric name or names of Neptune. The idea here is it's kind of an interesting one. So, astrological Neptune, right? And then there's astronomical Neptune. And so the idea here is astrology was a thing that predated astronomy by a long time, right? People would see these planets as objects that moved in the sky differently than stars would, and they sort of assigned these, just like we had, equinoxes and eclipses and all these predictable events, like for example, the springtime planting was related to how the seasons, which constellations would rise. There was a lot of attention to the stars in the coming up of humanity, let's say, and what ended up coming out of this was these planets that were visible were given certain properties, and this is how astrology came up. The moon had qualities, the Mars and Venus had qualities, and the last planet that was beyond Jupiter was Saturn for the visual eye, right? So astrologically, people talk about Saturn as the last planet in the sort of like the spheres of planets that the ancients knew of astrologically. Then something happened though when Neptune was discovered. Now we're fully in the age of science, and yet there's still an astrological tradition, a modern astrological tradition, maybe modern in the sense of it comes out of the works of the things like the Picatrix or William Lilly, but those works influenced how our modern astrology gets us to to today, with people like whether it's Robert Hand or there's a number of 20th century astrologers, and I've got a Liz Green book here on the table about Neptune, which is a great book because she takes it as a psychological planet. But anyway, the discovery of Neptune was suddenly now a dilemma for astrology, and we talked about this a little in the last podcast. Podcast 42, we talked about, the past couple podcasts we've been talking about Neptune, so we're kind of continuing that series. So today we're going to talk about one of the points that came up in our earlier podcast around Rudolf Steiner. Kind of felt that the outer planets discovered, being Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, he didn't feel that those names were the esoteric names, so to speak, of those planets. And what he kind of meant by that, and we read a couple quotes last time about this, but what he meant by this was because those don't have these planets didn't have that rich ancient tradition, they hadn't acquired that same insight into the planets to just be haphazardly named. So you kind of felt the names were somewhat haphazard. I mean, that's the way I understand it. I mean, maybe you guys can comment down below if you've read it and you understand it a little bit differently, but this is how I understand it. And then you have someone like, I'll take this Liz Green book, or you even have astrologers. If I just go through her bibliography, for example, I can call out some astrologers that I've read here. It's probably even, like I mentioned Robert Hand before. We talked about the Picatrix. You can even think of people like, I don't know, there's some classic astrologers I can't think of off the top of my head right now. But the idea here is they took some of those concepts, and maybe this comes out of the mystery schools, maybe the Golden Dawn and things like this. They were doing some research into this space, let's say, and they kind of came up with the properties of these newly discovered planets. So what I thought we would do today is let's go into that history of the discovery of Neptune, because Neptune was discovered before we saw it. There was like gravitational perturbations around Uranus, and then they looked at how they could use gravity to tell where Neptune should be, given the influence of another body on the orbits of the other planets. And I think that's very fascinating. They used gravity to detect where it could be, and they predicted it before they even observed it. But it's not visible to the naked eye. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about that, and then let's go through how Neptune got named, let's say, or what were some of the alternate names that were going to be given to Neptune. And finally, let's talk about what do we think possible candidates that would satisfy Steiner's idea of what the true name of Neptune is, or the esoteric name of Neptune. There was a great Isabella Hinckley book called it was about Pluto, and she named Pluto or Minerva. I think this book. It's a small pamphlet book. It's called Pluto or Minerva. I like the kind of idea of a book like this, right? The idea is she was looking for a way to rethink maybe what Pluto meant, and Pluto, because it seemed so underworldly, that maybe Minerva might be a better name for the planet. So this is just sort of that kind of insight. I feel like Liz Green does a great job with Neptune, because it does, we've talked about it in the past couple podcasts, the quest for redemption, Neptune as representing everything from dreams to science to revolutions to maybe not so positive things like addictions and other things, coinciding with the discovery of the unconscious. So let's kind of take that and find, hey, what would some other potential names of Neptune be that might fulfill this Steiner request? And then we're going to wrap up this podcast talking about, let's take all those names and let's think about what's the tarot spread of all these names. So we'll kind of imagine different names for Neptune. We'll cross-reference those names with actual bodies that might be out currently named these other names that we're going to offer, and then we'll kind of do a little bit of a creative, imaginative astrological research at the end. All right, so that's the game for today. Next podcast will be the last of our Neptune series, and I'm going to talk about that. We did mention how Neptune was discovered by gravity. I'm going to talk about, in podcast 44, we're going to talk about Neptune and gravity. So that'll be the follow-up of this, and that's going to wrap up the series. So let's jump into, let's talk about a little bit about the origin of Neptune. So like I mentioned, Neptune was discovered in the 1840s around the idea of this gravitational perturbation in the orbit of Uranus, right? So the idea here is they could tell that there was some other body that was influencing the orbit, but they didn't know about Neptune. So anyway, when Neptune was discovered, and I believe it's discovered by Leverrier, or maybe he did the calculations that went on to discover it, and then I believe it was. Yeah, I think, well, there's interesting, I'm just looking at this here. Actually, Galileo may have plotted a point on a star map with Neptune on it. So I think that was kind of interesting, that Galileo kind of falsely showed that it was a star. He thought it was a star. So he kind of drew it, but he didn't call it a planet, he called it a star, right? And then I believe Leverrier and Bouvard, and they're the ones who are kind of given the discovery. So the idea here is, so let's just think about what those names were. So the names, obviously it was named Neptune, which is the Roman god of the sea, right? Who's also Greek Poseidon. And then maybe Poseidon comes up as a first alternate name. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to open this up. And last time I did this, I didn't have it on camera. So let's just open this up, and I'm going to just put down a couple of these names as we find them. So we have Neptune already. We'll make a column for the name. We'll do Neptune. And let's just put down the name Poseidon, right? You guys see this Poseidon? We'll put down Poseidon too, because Poseidon is also was also in the running. And I think there was also in the running was Oceanus, right? So these are kind of similar, but they all have a different kind of flavor. There was other names too that people did. For example, when Uranus was discovered, the early name for that was Herschel, planet Herschel, after Sir William Herschel, who discovered it. But I believe the Neptune was the one that was chosen. Obviously, we call it Neptune. And if we kind of go into that same time period, 1846, Neptune is discovered. One of the names that Leverrier suggested, he was the astronomer who discovered it, was Janus. Janus is like a multi-faced god, right? Which kind of also fits the Neptunian idea of the unconscious, the spiritual, and the dreamlike. So there's something to Janus. We've got it marked down here. People also suggested Leverrier and Herschel was going to come, because in a way, Herschel's discovery of Uranus helped us discover Neptune. So then let's go into we'll recap a bit about that Steiner rejection of the name. So Steiner kind of thought the name wasn't vetted, let's say, in spiritual thinking, right? So the idea for him is, he thought that the name was yet to be discovered, and that we would have to understand better about the planet's role in the astrological system from an esoteric kind of study point of view before we could properly name it, right? And I think this is kind of an odd thing, because the name did kind of come and stick, and even the other names that they suggested also seem to be similar. One name so I did some research into some other names, and one name that kind of seemed to jump out at me, would a potential name for this was Dionysus, right? Dionysus is an interesting, because this represents, like Liz Green would talk about, that sort of addictive side, or dreamlike side, festive side, right, of Neptune. So let's go through the ones that we've got so far. We've got Neptune. Obviously, it's the Roman god of the sea. We've got Oceanus, was a titan of the ocean, right? So Oceanus is the titan of the ocean. The father of Oceanus was a father of rivers, and symbol of Earth's water is Oceanus. Poseidon, again, is just the Greek version of Neptune. Poseidon is the sort of god of the ocean, just like Neptune is. And but then there's also this idea of Dionysus, who is the god of wine, fertility, religious ecstasy, and also altered consciousness, maybe creativity. Dionysus, right? Janus, we have the god Janus here. Janus is a Roman god of beginnings, transitions, and endings. And this kind of has a Neptunian feel to it, right? The thing, though, here is, well, obviously there's a planet already named Neptune, right? Let's just put that there's a planet with this name. Poseidon, I believe is there a body named Poseidon? Let me just check quickly. Oceanus, I don't believe Oceanus has an asteroid named after it. Some of these might be asteroids. For example, Janus is a moon of Jupiter or a moon of Saturn. Janus is a moon of Saturn, right? So this is a moon, Janus. I believe Dionysus is an asteroid already, right? So now we're starting to see that there are some other astrological bodies named these things, right? So what are some other ones? Let's think of some other ones. What about, in the Neptunian theme, what about Proteus? Proteus, right? Proteus was the god of rivers and change, right? We could also have the old man of the sea, Nereus. Nereus is also but this is a moon. These are moons of Neptune already. Moon. And we can pull out the moons of the planets, and we'll talk about those maybe when we go through the next batch. What about, we can do Pontos, right? Pontos, which I believe is also a asteroid, right? So Pontos is also a primordial sea, right? Like it's like the embodied sea. It's like the sea, not as a god, but as the as the ocean, right? You can even see Triton. These are moons of Neptune, but Triton is a moon. Triton was the son of Poseidon, and the trident is the symbol of Neptune, right? You can even think of how about Leucothea? Leucothea. This would be, I think this is an asteroid as well. Leucothea is I think it's a goddess of ports, like safety from the storms, which has a Neptunian, when I say it has a Neptunian flair, I'm kind of going with the idea of how Liz Green frames Neptune, right? So these are just some examples of some of those other names, and like we can kind of go through, since some of these are already moons, we sort of see an argument maybe that, well, because there are names of the moons of Neptune, right? And here we got Neptune as a higher Venus. Let's just take a look at some of these moons that we just talked about. So we mentioned Proteus. So moons of the planets here. Proteus says chapter of material bondage and illicit substances, we'll call it. And prayed the sea gods, pouring them wine, offering the smoke of incense. Proteus sank beneath the waves as the waters closed over his words, from Ovid's Metamorphosis. The son of Proteus, the origins of Proteus are shrouded in mystery. He may be the son of Oceanus and Tethys, or Neptune and Phoenice. He was given the gift of prophecy by Neptune because Proteus tends the sea monsters. He is difficult to find, refuses to give answers, and often assumes different shapes. Okay, so that's Proteus. We talked about Janus. That was a moon of Saturn. Let's see Janus here. Janus. Interesting that Janus is already a moon of Saturn. Janus is another candidate for a name. 100 brazen bolts kept these gates closed, and the unnerving strength of steel. Then too their guardian Janus never leaves the portal, from Virgil's Aeneid. Janus is an ancient god of Italy who gave shelter to Saturn after he was deposed from heaven by his son Jupiter. Now this is interesting, right? Janus gave shelter to Saturn. I wonder if there's reference to that in, I've got the book here from Joseph P. Farrell. Got this great book from Joseph P. Farrell here, Thrice Great Hermetic and the Janus Age. That's a classic. I wonder if he mentions this origins of Janus. Maybe we can read from this a bit. Let me just check if there's something that jumps out at me that's interested. It talks a lot about the Hermetic, thrice great Hermes, the Hermetica, the Templars. Let's come back to it. So we got Janus here giving shelter to Saturn, right? So Saturn, he is almost like Mercury in this variety, and in action he knows to respect Saturn at the weakest. For the very honor of befriending the god, Janus was discovered in 1978 when Saturn was in Leo. So we've got a moon named Janus, and then we've got other moons of Neptune that are in the. We talked about Proteus. We've got Triton here. Triton ruling water, chaos, and cosmos. Son of Neptune. He's known as a half fish, half man, right? His upper body is human, but his lower half is a fish or a dolphin. He has a trident in one hand and a conch shell in the other hand. He is both the calmer of the seas and the resolver of conflicts. Well, this is very Piscean and a Neptunian, sink or swim. These fit in with Liz Green's redemption thing. So I wonder if Steiner would treat these with some as some candidates. We've got Nereus. We've got the Nereid is a moon of I don't know if Nereus, Naiad and Nereid, but not Nereus, but that's fine. Triton. So yeah, we got a couple of those moons there, and so let's. Here's my idea. So if we take this idea of each of these planets, we've got some. We start to get a list together of some other names. I mean, what we could put Thetis here. Thetis. This is a moon of Neptune. Right? We can put Nereid and Naiad here. Nereid, which is related to Nereus, because the Nereid are the daughters of. So Nereid is a name given to the sea nymphs that are the daughters of Nereus. Nereid rules psychic phenomena in the mystical. Chapters of colors, psychic phenomena, the mystical. The Nereids were the water nymphs. And then the Naiad, there's also Naiad. The Naiads are the sea nymphs. So I think one are river nymphs, the other ones are sea nymphs, right? So it's the difference between the sea and rivers, I believe. So these are also ruling of dreams, imagination, inspiration. Naiad was discovered in 1989 when Neptune was in the sign of Capricorn. Naiad has to do with earthbound, the way this allows us to explore and interpret our own world. When Naiad is in a positive relation to Neptune, Neptune is imaginative, inspired, lively, and gifted with dreams. When Naiad is in a negative reference to Neptune, Neptune is dull, lethargic, escapist, and uninspired. They might be considered daimons, each one a whispering trickling of the waters lie beyond our material world. The subtle, the aesthetic, and the spiritual. And then from them you can drink. So it's sort of like thinking of the inspiration of dreams as a river or a stream you're drinking from, something like this, right? So we have Nereid, and then we could probably also put in Larissa is the Greek name of the sea. So these are also moons, right? We can put in Larissa. Larissa is a moon of Neptune, chapter of higher consciousness. She's the Greek goddess of the name of the sea. She's the feeling of being at the coast and seeing the vastness of water reaching the horizon in the sky itself. She was discovered in 1989 when Neptune was in Capricorn. So Larissa is also a moon. And Thalassa, we have Thalassa, is another name of the sea. Thalassa. So we have many sea ones. We have Dionysus, which is not a sea one, and we have Janus, which is not a sea one. But we do have a number of these sea entities. So now let's kind of take a look. I'm going to go onto the my laptop on the side here. So now I think the idea to take this to the next step, let's think about, so we've got these bodies that kind of have these names already. I believe there may be asteroids with these here, but I'll just leave a note there. We can check. We can research them later. I think Oceanus is an asteroid. I know that there's a dwarf planet called Herschel now. Yeah, guys, if you guys know, you can leave a comment below. But the idea here is, now what if we were to do sort of an experiment with this? Let's take a look at, okay, we got a moon of Saturn, Janus, right? This is about beginnings. Let's just put here's about beginnings, right? Give them some keywords. Oceanus, there's rivers, right? We've got Pontos. The father of Nereus is Pontos. Nereus is the father of the Naiads and the Nereids. Right? We've got Pontos. Oh, that was, sorry, this is, Pontos is the father. Proteus is the shapeshifter. Dionysus is wine, revelry. Neptune is the ocean. Poseidon is the ocean. Triton is the sun and the trident. This is storms and the sea and the sea and the sea. These are the rivers also, rivers and the sea. Right? So we have these kind of in a similar theme here. Now here's my idea. What if we were to take, just as an experiment, because astrology does have the component of myth, right? So we're talking about the myth here. The idea of, so let's go back to the premise. The idea of the premise here was, these are the alternate names of Neptune, right? What if we were to put the, so we've got the name here, we've got the body, we've got the keyword. What if we put the period in? So what's Neptune's, what is Neptune's, orbit, let's call it, right? Like, so let's think of the orbits of some of these things. Like, well, I think Neptune is in years, right? It's 146 years, right? Is it? Let me look it up quickly. The orbit of Neptune is orbital period is 164 years, or 60,000. Let's go to days. Let's kind of, that's interesting. Just a note here. I just want to put a note on this page. Neptune, I think that these facts are kind of interesting. It's a 164.8 years, right? It's a 164-year cycle, which is 60,195 Earth days. But the Neptunian day, so Neptune rotates, so actually in Neptunian days, it would be 80,000 Neptunian solar days. So one rotation of Neptune, so the day on Neptune is shorter than the day on Earth, I'm guessing, right? Yeah. So anyway, I saw 64,000 days. So let's put the 64,000 days here. And just because Poseidon is also Neptune, we'll just put the same one. So 60,195 days. This is in days, okay? And then we'll put 60,195. What about Janus, the moon of Jupiter, Janus? That one has an orbital period of just 0.69 days. So this is 0.69 days, 0.69 days. Dionysus rotates around the sun, because it's an asteroid, in 1666 days. Proteus, it's a moon, so now we're talking about an orbit around Neptune. Proteus is 1.2 days, 1.12 days. And Nereid, I believe, is 0.29 days, 0.29 days. Larissa, 0.55 days. Thalassa, just checking a site here, 0.31 days. Tethys, do we have Tethys here? Tethys is 1.88 days. So it takes only, these rotate around Neptune quite quickly. Like in one day, they're shooting around the planet. They're going pretty fast. Triton, Triton. Now, we could have listed all the moons of Neptune, I guess, as alternate names. But you start to have this... so anyway, the image here we're starting to get for this is... I guess the idea I'm thinking of is you've got two kinds of periodicities here. You've got these long periods of, we've got Dionysus going around the sun. So you've got 1666 and 6195. This is sort of a long cycle. And then you've got this short cycle. So a number of these small moons around Neptune, anywhere from 0.31, 0.55, 0.29, 1.88, 0.69, 1.12, 1.88, 1.88, and some others. So this is a long cycle. Now here we're getting into like the esoteric research, right? So here's a short cycle. So here's the conjecture. Someone can script this into ChatGPT. Someone can say, make a PCA. We have to do a PCA point, right? So a PCA is like a principal component analysis, right? So we can think of it like this. Imagine you have a tarot deck. Let me get my tarot deck out, right? Imagine you have a tarot deck, and we use a tarot. How do we use a tarot deck? We use a tarot deck you take a tarot deck out, and there's some kind of, there's something with the tarot deck where if you have these cards, well, this one wanted to jump out. Which card was it? Okay. We've got the Two of Cups jumped out at us. Anyway, the Two of Cups. What I was saying where I was going with this is when you have a tarot deck, you get a set of conditions that now become referenced in the spread as you reveal these cards. So let me just see this Two of Cups. So we're just doing this live here. The Two of Cups is Venus in Cancer. So again, we have this Venus here. So Venus jumps out from us before. The idea is emotional exchange, right? Emotional exchange. Paying attention to love and surroundings, right? So anyway, you can go from these kind of concepts. You can start with this concept, and then as we do the tarot spread, and we ask for some clearance on these kind of cards, we get more insights into this initial card, right? So now we start out with this Piscean image, which is Neptunian, right? But then we start seeing some other, and we can keep going into that. What I'm proposing here, and we can do some tarot things in the future. If you guys are interested, leave a comment below. What I'm thinking to do here is, what if we were to put all of these into a program to plot out relative positions of some of these candidates? So imagine that there's a system. You've got Neptune here. You've got moons of Neptune in orbit. So moons of Neptune in orbit around Neptune. You've got a moon of, so this is Neptune. We've got a moon of Saturn. Right, so you got Saturn here, which is a ringed planet, and then one of its moons, Janus. Right, and then we've got an asteroid of Dionysus, and then we've got a couple of asteroids, and suddenly we have a kind of a system of relation between all of these components, right? These are all interrelating with each other. They all have some kind, it's kind of like a spread. So my idea here is if we could take the cycles of these two different groups, because obviously these won't really fit together. There's a short cycle. This would be a daily cycle. This is the kind of thing that when Liz Green would talk about Neptune, like what the problem with Neptune is, it's a slow-moving planet astrologically, right? It's a slow-moving planet. So a lot of its properties are generational. But at the same time, because Earth is rotating, we have a daily version of our exposure. We have a thing called ascendants, right, or transits, right? So you have transits, you have the changing relation of fast-moving planets, inner planets, to the slow-moving outer planets. So these are moving fast and these are moving slowly. So you constantly will have those changes. And if you go through, most astrology books will have planets in the signs. So for example, if we look at some of the moons, like we have Janus here. Janus in the first house has to do with prestige, armor, time, karma, teacher, inhibited identity, ingenious activity. Right? But in the third house has to do with scientific versatility, careful awareness, right? So the idea is, as we move the relation between these two sets, we can get insights to it. So I think this would just be an experiment that we could run. Maybe that's something, maybe I will put it in there. So the idea here is, if we could look at at this as a data set, right? And then we can extract the components of this. Maybe we can use that to get some insights into the work we just did today. I mean, because the idea here was we have most of them that came out with ocean-like. These are all ocean, right? These are ocean, rivers, storms, seas, rivers, oceans. Then we have, and the other, actually there's two more that I would put in this too. You know what? I just kind of thought of these, because I would also put in Morpheus. What if we had Morpheus as another name, or even Orpheus, right? Orpheus and Morpheus suddenly just came to me as alternate names. Morpheus, interestingly, is the god of dreams, right? Morpheus is the son of Hypnos, and he is the god of sleep or dreams. Morpheus is the god of dreams, which is Neptunian, right? This is dreams. And interesting, if you read the mythology of this, it says, Morpheus in Greco-Roman mythology is one of the sons of Hypnos, or Somnus, the god of sleep. So dream is the son of sleep. This sort of fits in with the Neil Gaiman. Are you guys aware of Neil Gaiman's work with his Sandman comic? He is Morpheus, right? And so dream is the son of sleep. And then there's also Morpheus of the Matrix, right? So Morpheus sends human shapes, morphi, of all kinds to the dreamer. So interesting. So the kinds of dreams you can have, so the sons of sleep, so Hypnos is the god of sleep, and he has sons, Morpheus, Phobetor, and Phantasus. So this is interesting. Let's just put these brothers down. So we have Morpheus, and then we have Phobetor, and then we have Phantasus, right? And the father is Hypnos, or Somnus. So it's sleep, dreams, but this is interesting. The morphi are the shapes of the human shape in your dream. So when you dream of people or human things, those are dreams from Morpheus. His brothers Phobetor and Phantasus send the forms of animals and inanimate things. So if you dream of animals, that's a dream that's sent by the brother of Morpheus called Phobetor. And if you dream of Phantasus, if you dream of things in inanimate object forms. Right, so this is very interesting, right? So Ovid called Morpheus and his brother, the other sons of Somnus, the Somnia, the dream shapes, saying that they appear in dreams mimicking many forms. And Ovid gives names to two or more of these sons of sleep. Phobetor is the frightener. and he takes the form of a beast or a bird or a serpent, and phantasus, which is fantasy, who puts on deceptive shapes of earth, rock, water, trees, and such, right? This is very interesting, right? So this is another name that I think that Green kind of, because like we have hypnotic trance here. So back into the discovery of the unconscious, we go back to Mesmer, right? So Mesmer is mesmerizing, it's hypnotism, hypnosis, sleep, right? But we also have that, here it says the hypnotic trance. Although its broader significance eluded them, most of the intriguing features of hysteria recognized by the early mesmerists was that the hysterical personality is eminently suggestible. A powerful susceptibility to hypnotic command, again, hypnos comes out, hypnotic command. The link between the extreme suggestibility and hysteria was particularly interesting in hypnotism, right? Hypnos again. And then, now Green's going to jump to Neptune. The great hypnotism and the small hypnotism. Wow, interesting. So now there's the great hypnotism and the minor hypnotism. The great hypnotism, I wonder if this is the great cycle, right? This is the great cycle, we can call it, and this is the minor cycle, right? So what this is saying is, what this kind of, you know how we roll here, right? The minor cycle is the dream cycle, right? It's a dream cycle, is the minor cycle, right? And the long cycle is the history cycle, right? This is the historical cycle. Now, again, this might be, I see, this is why I had that intuition back when we did the other podcast, that Steiner would like Liz Green's work. And I believe it still is, I believe that there's a lot of interesting things in this work that people, I really recommend people go out to read this book if you're interested in Neptune. There's a lot to be studied in this. The idea here, though, with bringing in Morpheus as a figure, is that now we have this other kind of esoteric concept where we're bringing in dreams, right? Now this is that strange dream-like state of, and the waking from a dream, but also the inspiration of a dream. So in some ways, the idea here is, this is a key idea of the unconscious, right? So the unconscious often reveals itself to us in our dreams, okay? But at the same time, dreams are of two kinds, right? Well, I got a couple of points about dreams that I think is important for this. I think for Morpheus, you have dreams that are inspiring us to change something. And then we have like the lost in the dream, sort of like a fantasy, right? And this is interesting, that fantasy is one of the aspects of Neptune sort of in the bad light. And then the idea of the dream as the inspiration, something came to you in a dream, something that changed your life, some insight that you got into the unconscious, an awakening of the unconscious. This is the positive aspect, right? So I think that these two cycles, what I would guess is, were we to do a study, and this is for someone else to do, maybe someone out there who's interested in modeling this, you could take the data of, Moons of the Planets concept. Actually, there's an upcoming book that's being worked on around the moons of the planets, Giuseppe Balsamo book that we're in the process of just brainstorming on. But the idea of this one is looking at some of the potentials of each planet being, so Moons of the Planet purports that if you have a planet with a moon system, that's actually an alternate horoscope system local to that planet. So if you could take Neptune's sky and its moons, just like we take our moon and we project it against the moving zodiac, if you could take the moons of an individual planet and use that as a localized system, now you have an alien astrology. But we could cross-reference it with the names that we have for our objects, And you can kind of get some insights into this. And I think this is where that complication comes for Steiner. We start talking about alien worlds and what their horoscopes are. We don't have any myths there because we don't know who's there. We don't know what's there really. And it's only those ancient planets that have thousands and thousands of years of study. And even look at Saturn. Saturn was we talked about a lot. We've had a lot of podcasts. You guys can go check out the podcast on Saturn. Saturn used to be called a malefic planet, right? A planet of born under the bad sign, right? When in fact Saturn is just aware of the weight of karma and the burden of time, and it's also aware of it's from an older order of the universe, and that's why it's the guardian of the outer solar system from the ancient world. These Saturnian planets, these outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, planets that are newly discovered outside of that, minor dwarf planets as well, trans-Neptunian objects. These may well be like green sort of intuits in the unconscious, but yeah, it's a very interesting myth. But this could be modeled as some kind of study. And just like we did in our Neptune in History podcast, or our Neptune and Led Zeppelin podcast that we talked about Neptune moving through those 164-year cycles, and we went through each cycle in the prior podcast. Or we looked at how Neptune transitioned from the 60s to the 70s, and how music was an indicator that we used. We can look at this collection of names and objects and sort of get some information on what's the nature of the unconscious, what's the nature of some of these realms. We can look at these systems. I mean, look, we have a whole micro history here, even with just the Neptunian worlds. We take Neptune, we have Triton, we've got Pontos and Nereus, we have Proteus, Thetis. These are all different Greek concepts of the sea, and we can learn a lot of insights from those. So I think it would be an interesting study. But anyway, maybe I'll leave it at that. Before we go, I want to do a quick shout out to the bookstore. We've got Moldenhauer's 3-volume set, Artificial Psychology of Desiring Machines, Impedance and Admittance in Desiring Machines, very timely, is out. We've got Psychoanalysis of Artificial Intelligence also out. This is interesting if you like science fiction or the works of Deleuze, Bernard Stiglier, Henri Bergson has some quotes there. The 3rd volume is in proof now, Computational Complexity and Psychiatric Agency. This series really stresses the idea of the coming artificial psychology that will need to be applied to artificial intelligence and humans interacting with artificial intelligence. So just timely topics. Also, as you guys know, we started to put together editing volume 1 of the podcast books. This was from our first year of podcasts. We are putting together a Dragon book, and we'll probably put together a Neptune book. It may become an Outer Planets book, and we'll bundle in all the Saturn books, but these are forthcoming. You can also go check out our Patreon if you want to help out the podcast that way. Some of the books are published there as well. If you are interested, I had some people asking about Dune Revenant. This has been taken down. No one wants to publish it because of copyright reasons. But there is a digital copy out there for $1 on the Patreon if anyone wants to read the Dune Revenant book. And I'm going to kind of leave it at that. So, hey, guys, let me know what you think. Add your research into the comments. Would like to do this as a live stream at some point. Hope this was interesting to people. Hope you got something out of it. We'll keep going in the next one. We're going to talk in the next podcast about Neptune and gravity. And I'll give you guys some a preview of what I'm thinking of for this one, the research I'm working on. The idea here is, again, it comes back to a concept of inner light and outer light. So the idea of the inner light and outer light, I'll give you a quick synopsis of it, and then you guys can look forward to that one. I'm still working on the research for it, but the idea for this one is, there was a great Frank Herbert book talking about that every soul had a corresponding star, right? And the idea that I had heard was that, think about the sun, right? The sun is our closest star, but it's so far away from the earth, because if it was any closer, we wouldn't be in that sweet spot of life. I mean, it would burn us if we were closer, right? So any kind of star has to be pushed to an appropriate distance, gravitational distance, the inverse square law, right? We don't want to be pulled into the sun. We want to be at a safe space from the sun to benefit from it, but also to have its light. But then also with the light goes in the night, right? So we don't always have that idea there. So with gravity, though, there's also this version of inner light, right? So we have two kinds of light. Think of it as the light that your eyes see, which is like the sunlight. But then, and this goes back to this picture. And this might be leading us into the sun, and maybe this will actually morph into a Uranus-Sun topic, the painting of the Uranus as the higher octave of the sun. So just put these up here. I had the Neptune-Venus one before. These are very old photographs of some paintings. But the idea of the sun at a distance, so when we have the inner light of speculation, we don't see that light. We're looking inside of when one looks inside their souls, when one's retrospective, when one searches the unconscious, there's a light there that's shining. There's an eye that can see, but it's not inside, it's not outside, it's not external, it's internal. And I thought of this approach with the idea of gravity. We know that Neptune was discovered by where it needed to be in a gravitational perturbation. But what if we were to say that gravity is also an inner and outer experience, right? So the idea is if we're too close to a gravitational object, we'll be pulled into it, right? So there's an attractiveness. There's also a gravitational repulsion that can happen. And then we also can have the same thing with ideas. Like an idea that we are really obsessed with may seem more proximate to us, right? It has more pull on us. So I kind of wanted to blend that scientific view of gravity with this experiential kind of gravitas type of thing, or importance. And so we'll go into that a little deeper. I've got some interesting stuff for you guys in the next podcast. Hope this was interesting, everyone. Thanks for your likes, subscribes, and comments below, and we will talk to you next time. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.